one thing before I get started, I do work for Rushmore Forest Products now. I was in Spearfish until the end of October. As far as I know, Jerry, we will take bugwood until the spring, late spring. I don't think we've ever stopped it in December, unless you were in one of our dead zones or something like that. But the blue stain is fine for us until off private property until late spring, early summer, when the stuff really deteriorates. So, contracts. Contracts are probably the most important thing for you guys to understand as landowners. When you enter into a deal to have anything done on your property, whether it's a commercial project, non-commercial, thinning, spraying, that contract, like Dave said, I think he said, it protects both you, the landowner, and the contractor. And it should be fairly easy to understand from both parties. It doesn't have to be a bunch of legalese that you have to pay $250 an hour for a lawyer to walk you through it. So we'll go through some of the major components. The types of activities as a forest landowner that you should have a contract for are commercial sale, which would be the sale of your timber, whether it's saw logs, go into a sawmill to make boards, or something we call products other than logs, which would be a post and pole type operation. And also with non-commercial or service contracts, where you are actually hiring somebody to perform some type of job for you to manage your property. Pre-commercial thinning, where the trees are not merchantable, you need to hire a fee-con or a hand crew to thin for the health of your forest, or fire breaks. Spraying for weeds, spraying for mountain pine beetle. There should be a contract between you and the company describing what is expected from both parties. The difference, I have a lot of definitions in both my presentations. I pulled most of them from the Dictionary of Forestry and then paraphrased them to fit. So, a commercial sale. Any timber harvest producing merchantable material at least equal to the value of the cost of harvesting. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you get paid. That means that the cost of performing the work is equal to the value gained to the contractor for removing the timber or whatever they're doing. And sometimes it's when you have, you might have a timber sale where they're removing 50 loads of merchantable logs, but you have enough road work and spraying and who knows whatever else, taking down those trees next to your house, and brings the cost down. And then a non-commercial or service contract is a contract where the landowner is paying for the services performed. But both require and when I say require, I mean it's not legally required, but it's a damn good idea. Components common to both types of contracts. We'll just go through most of the things that I include in contracts, and I think is a good idea. Some of the stuff that my boss would probably get mad at me for telling you ought to be in the contract, but every contract, real simple, needs to start with naming the parties involved in the agreement. The contract is a binding agreement between two or more parties. The landowner's name needs to be who's on the deed of the property. Just because Charles calls me up and says, I want to sell you some timber, we enter into agreement. Well, if his wife is on the deed, she better be included in that contract because she is a party to the selling of those trees off her property. And then the company name should be the company that you're doing business with. Simple display. You have the date of the contract, the landowner's name and address, company name, company address. it is a really good idea to have a property location description in there. The property is not always the same as where the landowner's mailing address is. So you should have a small paragraph in there describing the location of the property where the work is going to be performed. That should include a tax ID number or township range section, and a really good idea to have a map of the property location in the contract. That way everybody is on the same page. It should also include a statement that the owner, the landowner, can warranty good and legal title to the property. And this is something that does protect the contractor. Before I moved out to the Black Hills, I came from the Catskills in New York State, where we were about 4 hours from New York City. A lot of second homeowners moved up there. And a lot of landowners out of the city didn't really shoot you straight and narrow. There was a lot of crooked guys who were trying to sell you timber for property they didn't own. This does protect the contractor. We do have some due diligence on our side to go to the tax office, the court office, and make sure that you are. But this is something that protects the contractor. Components, this is all going to be components to both contracts. You should have a description of how the property boundary is going to be marked, whether it's flagging, paint. If you know it's a fence and the fence is on the line, you could describe that in there. More often than not, the fence is not a good property line marker because very rarely does it follow the lines exactly. You should also describe in the contract, and these can be real short, simple sentences in there. Who will mark the boundary? If you hire Jerry, you know that the consulting forester has marked the boundary, or the industry forester or the logger, whoever. Describe who is responsible for it. And also remember that even if you hire Jerry or myself or anybody else who's not a surveyor, we are not surveyors. So one of the things I like to do with property boundaries is go to the neighbor and get a simple separate agreement after you have flagged or marked your boundaries that they are okay with where you determine the boundary to be. It just makes life down the road a lot simpler because most of the time, like's been said earlier, the neighbor doesn't seem to know their landowner, their boundary either until you start cutting trees and suddenly, oh my God, you've cut on my property. So you get it out of the way ahead of time. But if you work with a consultant and he flags the line, and then you sell that timber in a bid process, one of the things I like to see from the mill side of things is then that you, the owner, and the consultant guarantee the location of the boundaries. Contract length, not meaning how many pages is the contract, but the time frame that the contract will be carried out. The beginning date, when the agreement is effective, and the length of the agreement, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is you and the contractor company has worked out. And everything that we're going over is negotiable. There are certain things that you probably don't want to negotiate too much on. Some of these things probably ought to be pretty strict, but contract length, very negotiable. I like to see, remember I'm coming from the industry side, I like to see a clause in there about extension due to inclement weather. It does protect both parties because I had this happen to me back in New York State where I had a landowner I bought timber from through a bid process from a consultant, and there was not a clause in there about an extension. Well, it was a 1-year contract, and we had a really wet year. Well, guess what? It was a lump sum sale where I paid up front. I wasn't just handing that money over to the landowner, so we were in there logging when we shouldn't have been in there logging. This does protect both parties. So, if you'd like us to be in there summer and we lost 2 months because of weather, have a simple paragraph that says time lost due to weather will be added on to the end of the contract. Insurance. Insurance is extremely important. And it's important to have in your contract that the company that you are working with will carry valid liability insurance and its subcontractors. Sorry, I missed that. The company and its subcontractors will carry valid liability insurance and workman's comp when applicable. Workman's comp, I believe in South Dakota, is not mandatory for sole proprietors, but if you have employees, it is mandatory. And liability insurance, I'll go over a little bit more of that later on some of the limits that I recommend and like to see. But you need to have that in your contract. And that way it helps protect you that they're not hiring Joe Logger who doesn't have insurance to fulfill the requirements of the contract. And then that comes back to bite you in the end. So anybody who's working under the terms of this contract would have valid insurance. Indemnification. This is probably one I'll get in trouble for putting on there. But it's extremely important for you as a landowner. It's a pretty simple paragraph. It basically says that the company that you're entering into this agreement with agrees to indemnify and hold you harmless against any and all claims arising from basically our operations. If we're in there logging and we leave a tree hanging up that we were hand cutting, and you go walking through the property and that tree comes down and hurts somebody, you, the landowner, can refer to this clause to say, hey, that is completely the contractor's responsibility. It is very important to have something like that in there, or else you'll probably get drug into a lawsuit anyway, but this contract should help protect you from some of that stuff. You should also include in your contract payment. Excuse me. Describe who will be paying who under the conditions of the contract, meaning whether it's a commercial sale or a service contract. And describe how the payment will be made, at what intervals, if it's after certain things have been completed, and for how much money. That should be stated and understood in the contract. For example, in a service contract, the owner agrees to pay the company X number of dollars per tree for spraying, maybe for a total of so many dollars, and you would know how many trees they're spraying, hopefully. And the payment will be due within 30 days of completion of spraying. Something like that. Or if it's a commercial sale, that the company agrees to pay the owner X number of dollars per ton, or X number of dollars total as a lump sum sale for the timber harvested. And maybe if it's a scaled sale, which we'll go into later, payment will be made semi-monthly based on the scale receipts at the mill. That needs to be clear and spelled out in the contract. Again, it doesn't have to be a bunch of legalese, but it helps set things black and white up front so everybody's on the same page. Some of the sections I like to see in there is state laws and regulations that the company will follow that. That's a pretty simple one, but it helps give you guys a little buffer in there. One of the situations that I have seen where this clause in your contract and our clause we have contracts with the subcontractors too. A simple statement like this has protected us if the subcontractor has decided to hire illegal immigrants. Well, it is not legal for them to do that. It separates us from them a little bit and says, well, we have signed a contract with you that you will follow all state and federal regulations. So it just is a little protection. Include any special protection measures that you have for your property. If you have something that you want to protect, fences, fields you don't want anybody in, an old outbuilding that's fallen down but it's 120 years old, or if there's any special sites or features that you want to protect, put it in the contract. That way everybody's aware of it up front and agrees to it. Describe the work that's going to be performed, what the expectations are. For commercial and non-commercial contracts, timber contracts, describe the cutting prescription that you have agreed upon through whether you're working with a consulting or straight with a industry forester. It should be agreed upon to meet your objectives. Spell it out in the contract. What the residual basal area is going to be, or the tree spacing, what the reserve trees should look like. Are they the best, tallest, straightest, whatever? And whether or not the trees will be marked. If they're going to be marked, how they're going to be marked, what color, above and below stump heights. Let's put all that stuff in the contract. Describe the slash treatment and stump heights. Whether or not you've talked about how that's going to all go, you should, because you need to know, am I going to whole tree harvest it? Am I going to lop and scatter it? Which we talked about a little bit earlier. Slash height, 18 inches of the ground. Put that in the contract. Stump heights. You don't want them hiring some subcontractor who doesn't like to bend over, and so all your stumps are 2 feet tall out there. Put it in the contract. And a really good idea is just a simple statement that they will follow the state BMPs. If the company you're working with doesn't know what the BMPs are, you probably shouldn't be working with them. For spraying contracts, the description of the work to be performed, not real familiar with this side of things, but describe the trees or the areas where the weeds are going to be sprayed. Describe how those trees are going to be identified if it's for mountain pine beetle spraying. And correct me if I'm wrong, John, or anybody else, but if it was me, I would have something in the contract that would describe the chemicals and the ratios, that how they get mixed and all that would be in the contract.
And that's required by the state act.
Okay. Describe a performance measure. And you could do that for both the commercial and the non-commercial if you wanted to. Signatures. At the end of all this, sign it. Both of you sign it and date it. And then keep an original copy for your records. Some other items that you may want in there, I always put most of this stuff in a contract. Your roads, skid trails, landings, if there's anything special about location of them, rehab, access to the property. Disclose who's responsible for gaining access. You had mentioned earlier that you had to go through a neighbor. Talk about it, figure it out ahead of time. If you can get written permission, put it in the contract that the owner will. If you can't and you want the company to do it, spell that out in the contract. Arbitration for disputes, I think this is a good one to have in there. You need to understand that you enter into an agreement with somebody, things do not always go as well as you expected. How are you going to deal with that? Most of our contracts for Nyman, I think, say that they will be handled in Wyoming court or something like that. I'm not sure what the background is there, but if you have certain seasonal and ground condition restrictions you want adhered to with your timber sale, you can definitely put that in the contract. Back east, a lot of times it was no logging during hunting season, which was a real pain in the butt because that was usually the best time to be logging. But talk about it, agree to it and put it in the contract. Something else that should be in the contract and figured out up front is the type of timber sale. A lump sum versus a volume or weight scaled sale. A lump sum is a timber sale in which the buyer and seller agree on a total price for the trees, and it's usually paid before harvesting begins. Most often you see these with consultants where they have went out, marked, cruised, tallied the trees, taken deduct, come up with a value, present it for bid, you bid on the property, and you pay up front for the trees. Weight scaled sale. I don't know how, I didn't put volume in there as a scaled sale because I don't think you see it too much around here anymore that I know of. Most of it's weight scaled where you agree, negotiate a set price per ton of wood delivered to a sawmill location, and it's paid after it's been cut and weighed and delivered. That you see a lot anymore is the weight scaled. Some of the pros and cons of both. Pros of a lump sum sale. Payment is made at the signing of the contract. You don't have to wait for your money. Most contracts are at least a year for timber sales. We're pushing up to 3 to 5 years on some of these timber sales now, depending on your location. Because of the epidemic, if you're further out, if you're up in the Bear Lodge or somewhere, you know, anything we have to go do there is something else we can't do maybe closer to the blow up that we want to be in. So a lump sum, you get your money when you sign the contract. It's easier to track payment, especially for income tax purposes, because you get it all at one shot. It's also easier to administer. You don't have to track weight slips by month or semi-monthly. Cons, both parties are taking a major risk in the estimated value that's offered. Again, coming from back east, where you had multiple species, multiple grades, we did everything lump sum, and I can tell you that it worked out on average probably 50-50 for us, meaning about half the time I overpaid for the timber and the landowner made out really good, and about half the time I underpaid for the timber and we made out really good. And that's not any trying to screw somebody, or it's when you cruise timber, there's unseen defect or maybe unseen grade that that comes out once you have the trees cut and skid. Volume estimates could be off. There's always a winner and loser. It very rarely comes out to right where you've agreed upon. And that is a major risk, I think, for the lump sum sales. The weight scaled sale, they're accurate. We pay for what we cut. You get paid for what we cut. The cons, it's more difficult to track and administer payments because you have to wait till the stuff comes over the scale and then get paid semi-monthly is how we do it. However, it's not that hard to track anymore with computerized scales. I mean, the truck comes in, punches in the ticket number, it's saved in the computer system, they print a report, and you got it. But you do have to wait till the trees are cut, skid, and hauled before you get paid. To me, this is the fairest way to do it. Everybody's getting paid for what's actually coming out of the woods. Another one I'll probably get in trouble for having in there. Performance bonds and deposits. Basically, it's a sum of money that is deposited by the contractor or purchaser, the company, against damages that may arise out of the work conducted under the contract. It's not an additional payment to the landowner, which sometimes gets lost in translation. It doesn't mean that if we fulfill the contract, you get to keep the $500 or the 10% of the contract. It's it's held to ensure contract compliance by the company. If we said that we were going to rehab roads back to original condition, seed skid trails and landings, and we don't do that, and we walk away, that's what a performance bond is used for, then to hire somebody else to come back in and do that. If the contract is carried out satisfactorily, the bond is returned. And the amount can vary depending on the scope of the contract. A lot of them are $500 minimums or 10% of the value. I don't think you will see most companies look to hand out a performance bond to a landowner. I don't know if that's, yeah. Two comments on performance bonds. We do them with the state and the federal government a lot. As a landowner, if you think that you need a performance bond, this is going to feed into the next presentation. Ask yourself, should I be doing business with this company? Do I think they won't fulfill the contract? It's not a bad insurance policy to have if the answer is I still think I should be doing business with the company. Just make sure you're not thinking performance bond because you don't trust the guy. And also, I like to see a third party brought into a performance bond, whether somebody hires or both parties hire a consulting forester, so that he doesn't have a vested interest in one side or the other. But basically, we have a hard time getting it back is the reason I'm kind of talking that way about it. It seems that the landowners view it as an extra payment for their timber, which it is not. So in summary, contract is a crucial part of getting the job done to your expectations. It does protect both parties and make sure you understand everything in the contract. Ask lots of questions and be involved. The more you're involved, from the initial meeting with the company to watching the operations to overseeing the completion of the project, the happier you will be. Most of the happiest landowners I've ever worked with were out there on a almost daily basis as we harvested their timber, asking questions from the beginning to the end, and they got what they wanted. Yes, it can be a pain in the rear, but you have every right to do that, and you should do that. I know one of the guys I work with right now is working with a landowner who he's given out 5 rolls of ribbon for 40 acres of timber, and the landowner only asked for one to begin with to flag some important trees in the woods that he wanted to keep. He's up to 4 rolls of ribbon now. He's been out there, but he's happy with what we're doing because he's involved. Is there any questions on the contracts?
With the weight scale method, say like a couple of years ago, have you adjusted your price per ton?
Yes.
Because of the water weight?
Yeah. Markets are getting better. So we have come up, and I think we're at $34 or $36 a ton now for PO. And with the bug epidemic a few years ago, when this was really ramping up and we were really starting to get into the blue stain wood, if we were cutting straight bugwood, I don't think we were paying any stumpage. It was still considered a commercial sale contract. I think we were saying, we'll remove the bug trees, we won't charge you anything for that. We are starting to see a better markup on blue stain. We really are. Demand is tough on it, but when you can sell it, we're seeing some better prices on it. The weight of those trees through water loss, I don't know if you're referring to bug hit trees and the dryness and it costs us a bunch more money to log bug trees because this is Nyman. we do guarantee trucks 30 tons of load, and it's hard to get it when you're in bugwood because the wood dries out, it weighs nothing. We do guarantee our loggers will make at least 30 tons. That's an average truckload of logs weighs 30 tons. So we're getting a lower grade product coming in sometimes at 20 tons, 23 tons of load. We're paying for tons that aren't there. The volume is there, but so it costs us more per ton. So we have backed off the stumpage rate on that. But we are starting to see blue stain move a little better. And there is a better market for it than there was even a year ago. Hope that answers your question.
I wondered if, because we're in a drought for.
Oh, no.
Period, it has an effect.
No, no.
What is about the going rate for good wood per ton? That's not bugwood.
Yeah, it's about $34 to $36 a ton right now. Out of that comes that's PO price, which means you deliver the log to me. If you're signing a contract with a sawmill and they're having the logger go in and log it and deliver, yeah, depends on the wood, between $5 and $7 a ton probably. Yeah, Ponderosa pine, Black Hills. You're not gonna get rich off 20 acres, but it'll pay some bills and keep your forest healthy.
For a 30-ton load.
Yeah.
That you
Yep.
deliver.
Yep.
For the owner.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's better than a stick in the eye, I guess, right? Yes, Charles.
I didn't see anything in there about cleaning up these mechanical splash piles.
Yes.
Do you do anything with them, or is that a separate contract?
No, it could be in the contract. If you do whole tree logging, you end up with a slash pile left at the roadside, the tops and branches of the trees. And it should be, you're right, it should be agreed to in the contract if the company you're working with is going to dispose of them or not. And everything's negotiable. Should be talked about up front. We do it.
You
Still,
don't like to, though.
we don't like to. No, but
I've been there and done that.
yeah,
So,
and you know the reality of it is most landowners like we talked about earlier. I mean the trees are worth X amount of money, and everything you start having done, roads, burning slash piles, there's a cost to that, and the company doesn't just eat that cost. That comes out of the value of the trees. So what happens a lot of times is we say we'll do that maybe for $1 or $1.50 a ton. We'll burn your slash piles, and they say, oh no, we'll take care of it. And then the slash piles sit there for 20 years because nobody takes care of it.
And if they're not done properly, then you've got a weed problem.
Yep.
Or erosion problem.
Yep.
Comes off of it that's unreal.
Yep, that's a very good thing to talk about up front and figure out. Choosing a contractor. Before I go into a lot of it, I'll real quickly run through some important terms. Again, most of them taken from Dictionary of Forestry. A forester, a professional engaged in the science, art, and practice of creating, managing, using, and conserving forests and associated resources for human benefit and in a sustainable manner to meet desired goals, needs, and values. It means that he should be working with you as a landowner to meet your goals, needs, and values and figure out how to get there. Logger is a professional engaged in the felling, skidding, and processing of trees. This does not mean that a logger can't be a forester or a forester can't be a logger, because there are cases when one guy can do both. It's not always the case, most often is not the case. But there are some good foresters out there who do log, and there are some good loggers out there who are foresters. An arborist, one who possesses the technical skills through experience and related training to care for individual trees and related woody plants in the residential, commercial, and public landscape. We'll talk, or you guys should understand mechanical harvesting. That's where all aspects of the harvesting operation are performed with machines. Fellow buncher is a machine that cuts the trees down with a head that can grab a hold of the tree and move it around. A skidder, usually a wheeled machine that skids the logs by dragging them or the trees to a landing. They can be either a cable skidder, which has a winch on the back of it. They run the cable out with chokers on the end of that cable that they wrap the chokers around each tree, winch the trees to the skidder, and then drag them out. Or a grapple skidder, which has jaws that pick the butts of the tree up and drag it out. A delimber is a machine that will take the limbs off the tree and bucket to the desired length right there at the landing. A forwarder is a machine that is self-loading. It transports the trees by carrying them completely off the ground. A fecon, you hear that word a lot. It's actually a manufacturer of a mulching head that is attached usually to a skid steer, and it's used to mulch slash down to within 18 inches of the ground or doing some pre-commercial thin operation. A chipper, machine consisting of an in-feed conveyor, once in a great while, a debarker, and a chipper, which chips are being blown out into a truck or into the pile. You might hear about conventional harvesting instead of mechanical harvesting. That is trees felled this weird way with a guy and a chainsaw, and you don't see that a lot anymore. But then the trees are usually limbed in place, and the merchantable portion of the tree is skid to the landing. Tractor logging, somebody had asked about steep ground. It's usually a track-mounted machine like a bulldozer with a grapple or winch on the back. We do have at least one of them I know in the hills. I don't know if anybody else is doing it. And that's we usually use him on 40% grade or higher. Sometimes a little bit less than that depending on the ground conditions. But there's a higher cost to logging that steep ground with a machine like that. So, that picture's blurry, isn't it? That's supposed to be a Timco with chips flying at you. You can see to the right of him, he's got a bundle of trees. He's got 4 or 5 of them laid there. The one he's cutting, he's probably going to lay right with it. And then the grapple skidder will back up and grab the bunch of trees and head to the landing.
What would you say that grade was he was on there?
I would say that was probably 17%. I don't know.
And what can they go up to?
They will, the
without
Timcos,
small frame?
the Timcos, they will actually go up on the 40% ground. They will get places that the skidder can't get. Because they're tracked machines, they're self-leveling, center of gravity is usually fairly low on them. Yep. Yep. A lot of times on the real steep ground where it's not worth having a specialized piece of equipment come in for maybe a load of logs that's up at the back of this timber sale, the Timcos can actually bunch the trees and then drag them down to where a skidder can get them. They don't really enjoy doing that, but it can be done. There's a grapple skidder. It's got a bundle of logs in it, and it's heading to the landing. You can see the tops are still dragging on the ground. Oh, how'd that get in there? We don't use those skidders very often in the Black Hills.
I thought that was
A delimber. That's my daughter was really excited to see a delimber, but I don't know. I think I got another picture too, but you can see these are the whole trees. The butt ends of them are skid to the landing. The slash is piled and left there to burn, and the logs are stacked next to the road. But that machine takes the limbs off the tree and can bucket into the desired lengths. That's my son who's not as excited about it. But the front of the boom slides out because the back of the boom is holding the tree. It slides out with just a little bit of pressure on the trunk and just strips the limbs right off of it. And when it does that, the machine knows through the computer system where the head is length of the log it's going to make, and then you hit a button and it cuts it to your right length. Forwarder, the trees are felled in the woods, usually when you're using a forwarder, limbed, cut to length in the woods, and then the forwarder grabs the logs that are already processed to the right length and brought out of the woods. There's some pictures of pecans, which you saw earlier. A chipper. They do make the woods look really nice. As a landowner, if you ever think about running one yourself, go to John Ball's presentation on safety with chippers, and you will change your mind. And don't eat lunch just before you watch that. I think this is actually a picture of a toy, but this is the best I could find for the tractor logging. But that's how we log steep ground. And the guy that we use doesn't have anything that nice looking, but he gets the job done. All right. That stuff is really important to understand if you're going to be hiring somebody to do some work on your property. You need to be educated enough to at least talk about what you want and how you're going to meet your objectives. And the first thing to consider when choosing a contractor is the scale and scope of the job. It's really important to understand the scale and scope so that you can match a contractor and company to meet those objectives in a timely and cost-effective manner. For example, if you own 10 acres and you're going to end up producing 5 or 10 loads of logs and you're not going to get any of your neighbors involved with you, then it's probably not going to be very economical to hire a guy who needs to move 3 pieces of equipment in to do a whole tree logging job that costs him $500 per piece of equipment to move in, and he's going to charge you for those 5 loads of logs. But you could hire a smaller guy who has a one skidder, and he can still pile brush if you need it to be done the whole tree, or he can lop and scatter it, and get your job done on a smaller piece of property. And the opposite holds true. I mean, if you got a 1-year contract and you got 200 acres or 200 plus loads of logs and you hire one guy who's got a chainsaw, he might be in there full time from when you sign that contract and maybe still not get the job done. So you have to understand the scale and scope. Consider your objectives as a landowner. It seems like there's been a big push for whole tree logging, and I tend to agree with Jerry. I like to see lop and scatter when it's appropriate. But whole tree does remove the fuel loading from the woods, which is why we've really pushed that way. And right now with the beetle epidemic, there's no shortage of fuel loading and nutrients in the woods coming down. So whole tree harvesting, your typical crew consists of a feller buncher, a grapple skidder, and a delimber. You do need certain ground conditions to land whole tree operations, meaning you can't have roads that are cut side hill on a steep slope like this, because the delimber can't pile the brush on the steep slope. So you have to have the right ground in order to produce those whole tree piles. Lop and scattering, typical crew is either a conventional hand crew with chainsaws and dropping the trees, limbing them, bucking them up. It could also be a cut to length crew, which is a mechanized crew that uses a feller buncher to cut the trees. Then a processor, which is kind of like a delimber. I should have had a picture of it. I think John had a picture of a processor earlier, but it delimbs the trees in the woods, bucks them up, and then piles them for a forwarder to come grab and carry them out of the woods. It does leave the slash in the ground or in the woods where you have to lop it down to that 18 inches. You have to understand what your objectives are. If you're concerned about, if this timber lies just south of your house and your house at the top of that slope, and maybe you do want a whole tree, even forget the nutrients because of the fuel risk, but you have to understand what you're looking for, and it's your property, so it's what you want. A forester's job is to tell you what will happen if you do it. mastication versus hand cutting for timber stand improvement. Mastication typically uses a fecon. Usually it's more cost effective when removing large numbers of trees over larger areas because the cost is a little higher than hand piling. But if you were to hand pile 100 acres, you probably would be better off feconing it. Not that I know too many 100-acre parcels that we do it on, but what if you enter into the agreement with a sawmill and they're going to use subcontractors? How do you understand the scale and scope and choose who's going to do the work? If you sign it with a sawmill, they might have 30 different contractors they use to carry out their work. So start asking questions before you sign it. Talk to a consultant. But it's perfectly acceptable for you to know who they plan on bringing in, what type of operation to meet your objectives. Ask those questions up front before you sign a piece of paper. So where do you find these guys? Black Hills Forest Resource Association is one place that has a list of contractors in the hills. And again, it doesn't tell you good or bad, it has a list of contractors. Contact the state forester, but those guys can give you a list. Contact a sawmill. I can tell you good and bad, no. I give you names. But then it's up to you to decide who you can trust. And how do you do that? You start asking questions. You call them up, take the walk in the woods. Ask how long they've been in business. What kind of insurance do you carry, and will you give me copies of it? And it better be, yes, I have insurance, and yes, I'll give you copies of it. What kinds of equipment do you have? Understand their operation, and is it going to meet your objectives? What size jobs do they normally work on? If they normally do 40 loads a week and you got five loads to do, probably not going to work out well unless they can split off a small crew or something. But talk about that stuff. How do they market their logs? Do they always sell to one mill? Do they try to get bids and get the highest price? Talk about that up front. Have you completed any logger training or continuing education program? There is some logger training programs here in the Black Hills. I don't know if there's I was looking online and I actually asked our SFI coordinator at Nyman, and he did not know if there was any online list of these guys as meeting. Yeah, I haven't seen one either. But ask, because there is logger training. These guys do have the opportunity to go through it. BMPs, forestry, silviculture, that sort of thing. Ask them if they implement BMPs. And then, of course, references. Ask them for references from previous jobs and from sawmills they've worked with in the past. You can find a lot out in this small community about people just by talking to different folks. So insurance, once you choose somebody and you like this guy, there's a few things that they need to have for insurance requirements. And when I say need, I'm not giving legal advice either, but they must have the right insurance and not just insurance. General liability, of course they have to have a GL policy. I like to see $1 million. It's not mandatory by any means. I have seen policies of 500,000, but obviously the more limits the higher limits they have on their GL, the more you're protected as a landowner. Logging and lumbering endorsement. If you're doing a commercial harvesting operation, it's a must. You must make sure the contractor or company has a logging and lumbering endorsement. And what this means is most general liabilities exclude fire suppression from their policy. Once you once you enter into this logging and lumbering, I think that's usually called a logging broad form PD form. It allows the contractor to buy back the fire suppression. It's not cheap, but it does protect the landowner. We require as a sawmill for all the contractors to have because it protects us. It basically ensures fire suppression costs if there's a accidental fire started. You must have it. Ask the contractor to give you a copy before they begin. And ask specifically about the logger broad form B form and if it covers fire suppression costs. Workers' comp is not required for sole proprietors, but if they have employees, they should have workman's comp. If they have subcontractors, this is pretty typical. You see with loggers, you got logger Joe that owns the company. He's got 5 cutters out there. So you're wondering, how come he doesn't have workers' comp? Well, he says they're all subcontractors. They're all individual contractors that I've hired to be out here and cut. All those guys you should make sure have the same insurance requirements that Joe Logger has. So if they cut their leg off, it stops at their insurance and doesn't come through him and then to you, and next thing you know, everybody's being drugged down. So, and that was back to what we talked about in contracts. The statement under insurance, it should say the company and its subcontractors will have valid liability and workman's comp. When you're choosing a contractor, think about the timeline to carry out the work. Goes back to understanding the scale and scope of the job so that you can find a contractor that will meet your objectives. Prescription and design was on my list to talk about. I think it was covered a little bit earlier. So when all is said and done, choose a contractor, forester, that can follow the prescription, or logger that can follow the prescription design to meet your objectives. It is your timber, it is your property. You can't stand the trees back up after they've been cut. So make sure it's somebody that can fulfill your objectives. That's why I'm sure we all have said it over and over again. Contacting a professional forester, create a prescription designed to meet your objectives. Timber is a long-term investment, and we are all charged with being good stewards of the land. So picking the right person, having a sound contract is crucial to getting the job done right. Take the care and time to find the right company. You know, it's your right to say no to somebody and go to somebody else. So that's all I had. I do have a few copies of a pamphlet that we literally had to dust about 10 years of dust off of it here, but it's how to choose a quality logger. There's extra copies at the Spearfish Sawmill, and I got some copies here if anybody wants a copy of it. It's old, but it still holds true. So